Welcome to this presentation on the Braille system, its history, how it works, and some basic rules of its use. I say the Braille system because it's far more than just an alphabet. It's a whole system for reading and writing texts which might be literary, musical, scientific, or mathematical. First of all, a little history. Printing for the blind has to be done by what's known as either relief writing or tactile writing. The inspiration for this may have come from carved lettering on stone and wood, dating back even as far as the first hieroglyphs of the ancient Egyptians. People really only started to address the problem of communication for the blind in the 16th century. The first attempts to write for the blind date back as far as 1517, when Francesco Lucas de Zaragoza attempted to write by printing onto thin wooden tablets letters that could be felt. Subsequent people such as Romano Rampacetto and Francesco Lana Terzi tried a number of different methods, but these all boiled down to either having the letters in relief, that is to say raised above the surface of the wood or paper, whatever it was, or carved into them. Pierre Moreau, a French printer, was to try a system using lead letters that were movable, a sort of movable type. In other words, it was possible to use the letters to make up one text and then rearrange them to make a different text at a later time. And another system invented by George Harsdorfer in Nuremberg in 1651 used waxed tablets which were engraved with a stylus. Here again one could melt the wax and engrave something else. Valentin Hauy was one of the first people to focus on the integration of blind people into society, and he in fact founded the very first school for the blind, which has since become the National Institute for the Blind in Paris. His system of writing simply used large letters on large pieces of card, and these were embossed into the card so that one could feel the text. One of the problems that people found in embossing text onto paper, or indeed any form of relief writing, was that if the letters were simply the same as in conventional typography, they were very often too complicated in their shapes, and it was not easy to distinguish one letter from another. So various different attempts at simplifying the shapes were made by Klein, Ballou, Gall, Alston, Frere, and above all William Moon. Here on this slide is William Moon's alphabet, and as you can see, quite a number of the letters resemble their familiar typographical forms. For example, the A is like a capital A, but it doesn't have a crossbar. The C is exactly like a capital C, and the D is exactly like a capital D, but without the downstroke. In this slide we see a system invented by Charles Barbier, which is based on sets of 12 dots, and this gives a possible different combination of 4,095 different 12-dot characters. Luis Braille took that system and simplified it down to a cell consisting of only 6 dots. Luis Braille, born in 1809, was to become a teacher at the School for the Blind in Paris, and it was here that he developed his system of writing. The School for the Blind in Paris soon adopted Luis Braille's system of writing, and it was quite popular with the students and teachers. Unfortunately, in 1838, a man called Dufau became the director of the School of the Blind, and he opposed Luis Braille's system, and in fact he forbade its use and returned to a system invented by Richard Alston, in which the alphabet is similar to the traditional one but reproduced in relief. In fact, it was quite similar to Hauey's version of the alphabet, but rather simplified. In order to eliminate the Braille system completely, as he wished to do, he got rid of all the writing tablets that were used for creating Braille texts, and he also eliminated the few Braille books that would then become available, including the very first book of Braille, which was a 3-volume history of France. Following the ban on the use of Braille, the blind children at the school rebelled against their director and secretly carried on using Braille. Fortunately, Joseph Godet, Dufaul's assistant, was able to convince him that he should reinstate the system. Louis Braille lived for only 43 years, and he died in 1852 after much hardship and privation. Nonetheless, during his short life, he managed to adapt his Braille system for English, French, Spanish, German, Italian, and Portuguese. In Lausanne, the Braille system was imposed in schools, and in 1860 a print shop for books in French and German was founded. In 1854 the Braille system was officially adopted in France and then in Portugal. In Germany the Braille system underwent some amendments in the signs which caused confusion, since only 14 out of the 25 schools for the blind adopted the amended Braille and 11 used the original method derived from the French. In England, 4 reading systems were in use, those of William Moon, Fry, Alston and Gall. In addition, there were 2 other shorthand systems from Lucas and Frere, but in the end people decided to adopt the Braille system, and in 1870 it was officially adopted. Finally, at the International Congress for the Education of the Blind in Paris in 1878, Braille was universally adopted as the method for reading and writing for the blind. The Braille system was also adopted in the United States of America at about this time, despite some differences and controversy among educators there. Since that time, Braille has spread to every language, and indeed here is an example of the Braille used for Tibetan, a language which has 30 consonants. The typical Braille cell is a rectangle of 6 by 3 millimeters, and it contains 6 dots. Here is a Braille tablet, which is a very cumbersome way, by modern standards, of embossing Braille. Nonetheless, it was the only way of doing it when Braille was first established, and the way it's used is that you emboss from behind using a little tool that pushes the paper out, and then you read it from the other side. This slide shows what's known as a Braille ruler, which is used in very much the same way as a Braille tablet to line up the dots in order that they can be embossed from one side and then of course read from the other. This slide shows the different combinations of dots that can be made using this system. There are 63 of them, and as you can see, the first row of them uses only the top 4, and then in the second row that same sequence of dots from the first row is repeated, but with an extra dot in the bottom left hand corner of the cell. So each set of 6 dots, or 6 spaces as it might be, is known as a cell, and they are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, going down the left hand side and then down the right hand side. 1, 2, 3 on the left, 4, 5, 6 on the right. So we would say in the second row, for example, that the extra dot over and above what was there in the first row is a dot 3. And here we have the 26 letters of the alphabet as used in every language, and the reason that the W is out on its own is because when Braille invented this system it was for French, and the French language doesn't use the letter W. but it was added later on when it was required for other languages. When Louis Braille was designing his system, it's quite likely that he attempted to make some of the characters similar to their original typographical equivalents. But with only 6 dots available, this was not always going to be possible. And this means that some of the symbols don't look a great deal like letters as we know them, and therefore some strategies for memorization are worth adopting. With the letter A, since it's the first letter of the alphabet, a single dot and a dot 1 at that is a logical thing to have, and therefore that's the best way of remembering that one. With the letter B, one might say that with the dots 1 and 2, the vertical pair of dots, that perhaps they look a little bit like the holes created by the lines of the letter B, the capital B that is. The sign for D, which is dots 1, 4 and 5, in the picture it's shown as being superimposed on the arch of the curve of the D, and perhaps this might help to remember it. The letters E and I are easily confused, but it's perhaps possible to differentiate between them if we imagine the dot 5 of the letter E as corresponding to the end of the middle line of the E, and perhaps the dot 4 of the I as corresponding to the I which we would place on a lowercase I. With the letter F there is more of a correspondence. Although it only has one horizontal bar in its shape, it nonetheless does look a bit like an F, as indeed does the H and the J. The letter G is represented by dots 1, 2, 4 and 5, and therefore forms a rather distinctive little square shape, which, if it doesn't look an awful lot like a G, is at least a very distinctive shape within the Braille cell system. The symbol for L is a vertical line, which is a convenient equivalent of the vertical line of a lowercase l, so dots 1, 2 and 3 there. And then with the letter O we have, perhaps one might say, part of a circle described by the dots 1, 3 and 5. The letter P, as we can see with those 1, 2, 3 and 4 dots, has some resemblance to the shape of a character P, and the symbol for Q, dots 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, does represent at least something similar to a Q, with that little line sticking out of the bottom of it. In looking at the letter R, we can imagine that the dot 5 sticking out from the vertical line made out of dots 1, 2 and 3 corresponds to the line that sticks off to the right in the R. And in the letter S we can see how the dots 2, 3 and 4 form a shape that at least corresponds to the top contour of the S. The letter U is represented by dots 1, 3 and 6, and here again there is some portion of the contour of the letter U that is corresponding to that shape of 1, 3 and 6. The letter X is made out of dots 1, 3, 4 and 6, and as such does represent something like the ends of each line of the X. There are necessarily rules for the use of spaces, just as there are in print, when we use the Braille system. We always use a space between two words. We never put a full stop, a space before a full stop, but only after a full stop. Space would never be used before or after an apostrophe. There would be a space before an open bracket or quotation mark, but never after an open bracket or quotation mark. A space would never be put before a closing bracket or a closing quotation mark, and after a closing bracket or quotation mark, except when followed by a punctuation mark, there would always be a space. Now we're going to look at the main rules of Braille syntax as adopted for the English language. The capital letter or uppercase sign is a .6, and this is placed before the letter that is to be capitalized. In the example shown, the name Paul with a single .6 cell before the letters P-A-U-L indicates that the P is to be capitalized. If we wanted to spell the whole word in capitals, we would put two capital signs. So that would be .6, .6 in two consecutive cells, and then again the letters P-A-U-L. In both examples, of course, the letters P-A-U-L were identical in the Braille. It required the code, the sign before those letters, to indicate the nature of the letters, whether they were uppercase or not. A very important sign in Braille is the number sign, which is made out of the dots 3, 4, 5 and 6, and the function of this sign is to reinterpret some of the letter signs as numbers. So in the diagram we can see that the number 1 is represented by the number sign plus the sign we've currently learnt as A. So dot 1, which represents A in literary Braille, is now functioning as a 1 because it's got a number sign before it. Similarly, the number 2 is represented by the letter B, but with a number sign before it. So the second letter of the alphabet becomes number 2, and the third letter of the alphabet becomes number 3, and so on. 0 is represented by the letter J with the number sign before it. Ordinal numbers. If we want to describe something as being first, second, third, fourth or fifth, then we have the number sign and then the number itself, and then just as in ordinary text we have ST for first, ND for second, RD for third and TH for all the rest, so fourth, fifth, etc. So to write the word first, we put a number sign, and then a dot 1 in the next cell, which would have been an A without the number sign but now represents a 1, and then ST of course is represented by the ST sign, which is dots 3 and 4. One exception that should be pointed out is that with second and third, sometimes in Braille only a D is put, so instead of the ND for second, sometimes just the D is placed, and likewise instead of the RD for third, just the D is written. When we write Roman numerals, we often write in print using capital letters, and so the capital sign is frequently used in Roman numerals in Braille. So the sign for 1 is the capital sign, that is to say dot 6, and in this case the letter I, so dots 2 and 4. The number 2 in Roman numerals, of course, is made out of two I's, and therefore what we have then is a capital sign, dot 6, and the letter I twice over. Likewise for 3, we have three I's with the capital sign before that, and for the number 4 we have IV and the capital sign before those letters. Hyphenation of words. The hyphenation sign dots 3, 6 is used without spaces. When hyphenating a word, it should always be split between syllables, and the hyphen is put at the beginning of the new line, so that in the example where it says here is a word hyphenated across 2 lines, the word hyphenated itself has been split into 2 syllables, hyphen plus ated, and the hyphen is put at the beginning of the second line before the ated part of the hyphenated. Punctuation marks. The same rules here apply very much as they do to traditional script, with spaces after but never normally before. The exception is the left bracket, where a space is needed before the sign. Abbreviations. When shortening a word, for example Mr, M-R dot, a full stop is used, just as in print. So in the example given it says Mr. Lewis, and the Braille for that starts off with a capital sign and then an M and then an R, which won't be capitalized because there was only one capital sign, and that's followed by a full stop, and the full stop in Braille is dots 2, 5 and 6. Abbreviations for dates. Usually the number sign is only used before the first digit. Hyphens are then used, as in print, to separate the day, month and year. Formatting paragraphs. There is no special sign for the end of a paragraph. New paragraphs are indicated by starting the first word of a new paragraph in the third cell of a new line. A blank line is not left between paragraphs. Italic, bold and underlined script. Although these are of relatively little relevance or use for Braille readers, there are signs for italic, bold and underlined scripts. These signs are only used really for the sake of consistency with the equivalent printed text. Here we see a table in which the signs for bold and italic and underlined script are used. The symbols for the ends of passages are placed without a space after the last word. In 2011, a new form of Braille called Unified English Braille was adopted for use in all English-speaking countries. Up until that time, there had been some significant variations between the forms of Braille used in Australia, America and Great Britain in particular. And so the changes from Standard English Braille, which is what was used in Britain, and Unified English Braille are worth noting. The table on this slide shows one or two of the significant changes, and perhaps two are worth pointing out to do with full stops. In Standard English Braille, the full stop and the decimal point were actually signified by different signs. In print, of course, they'd be signed by a full stop in both cases, effectively, and that's exactly what happens in Unified English Braille, that the full stop sign is used now for a full stop and a decimal point. Similarly with the ellipsis sign, which is in print effectively 3 full stops, Unified English Braille takes that and uses the full stop sign 3 times. There are of course many texts in circulation in Standard English Braille, and it'll be a good many years before we can do without knowing what those signs meant in Standard English Braille as Unified English Braille takes over. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation on Braille and found it informative. There are many resources available online, particularly on the RNIB website. Thank you for listening.